All right, I think we're ready to kick things off. So welcome everybody and happy GIS Day. Thanks so much for attending today's webinar, Conversations on GIS, how to prepare your community for success. My name is Marion Kennedy and I'll be moderating for today's presentation. We're going to go ahead and get started in just a second, but first I would like to say that we are very excited to have our presenters, Marion Spencer, Will Schmidt, and Chris Brussow with us today. They each bring unique GIS experience to the ASWorks EIM team, and I, for one, am excited to learn more about GIS from them in today's webinar. But before we get started, I just want to give everybody a quick heads up. The microphones have been muted, so if any of you have any questions at any time during the presentation, you can use the Webex Chat tool. You should all see the chat icon located on your screen, and this acts as an instant messaging tool. Please feel free to use the Webex Chat tool to enter any questions during the presentation, and make sure you send them to host, that's me, and I'll be happy to field them to Marion, Will, and Chris at the conclusion of the presentation for a brief Q&A session. So with that said, I think we are ready to get started. I think, Marion, you have the floor.
So much. I'd like to thank everybody for logging on with us today. I know it's been a hard year, so I'm just glad everybody can make it. GIS Day this year means a little bit different, right? Because we've had COVID and the presidential elections, but as we've seen in the last 7 months, GIS is making a huge impact on we're seeing information throughout our government. So that's a great thing, and it's a great thing to identify in GIS Day this year. So my background is primarily in imagery analysis and GIS analysis. I did that for the military for 16 years. And then I moved over into the software industry for AssetWorks EAM. I'm going to turn it over to Will, and he can give a little bit of his background in GIS.
Yeah, thank you, Marion. So my name's Will Schmidt, and I got my start in GIS straight out of college, working for an EAM software company, a different one. And then I left the industry for a couple of years and worked for a SaaS company doing API product management, API implementations, and now I'm back, right? So I'm back in the EAM space doing product management, and yeah, I've been in the technology industry now for almost 15 years, and in GIS about half that time. So yeah, I guess we'll turn it over to Chris if he's back.
I am back. I crashed for a second there, but here I am. My name is Chris Brussow. I've been involved in working in GIS for like 12 years, maybe 13, and went to school for quite a while, and played a lot with GIS, and it's just one of my major passions. I've done everything from analysis, GIS analysis, to the technical aspect of implementation of actual GIS software. So done quite a bit in there, and fantastic product. So thanks.
All right, and I just want to get out Ellen. Thank you so much for putting this on today and helping out. She's been with AssetWorks for 5 years and has just been a great advocate for EAM and has asked a lot of very interesting questions and helped to thought processes around GIS for the last 3 or 4 years since I've been here. So as we move
Thanks, Marion.
Yeah, no problem. And so as we move into what GIS Day is, it's an annual event hosted by Esri. We have participated for the last few years, and it's just a wonderful opportunity for us to get together and really talk about GIS and how it impacts our communities and how it impacts us personally. We've done lunch and learns, webinars. We really do love to get together, and unfortunately this year we can't be together in the same place. So I just love the fact that we're able to be here on this webinar together. Now, the way that this is really designed to work for the webinar today is it's really just a discussion. I think that, all of us have a lot of ideas and thought processes around how GIS can help our communities. And it's great for all of us to get together and really talk about those. And we have, a lot of out there or companies out there trying to tell us what the best way to do certain things are, but I think it all really depends on your organization and what goals you're trying to accomplish. So as we kind of walk into what we're talking about, for me, GIS is extremely important. You guys get to see a picture of the cake we got last year for GIS Day. It was a lot of fun. I love that cake. But it's the ability to see things, like see so much information in one visual representation, and really understand that information so much better. So, for instance, if we break it down into counties, and we break it down into the suburbs, and really get into the data. When looking at a map, it's just such a beautiful representation of data. It also allows us, not necessarily even with maps, a lot of people just assume that GIS is associated to maps, but it's just a spatial understanding of where things are happening and how we can take this information from around the world or around our cities and states and information to make good decisions constituents and really impact the world as a whole. If you're doing analysis for climate change, or it all really actually depends on what you care about. But those are the things that I think is so important. And then as we see these tools and like ArcGIS Online available to just the regular public, being able to allow our constituents to visualize this information and know that we're there for them and that we're trying to address issues that they have, and having that information open to them, I think is going to be incredible and into the future, where we have people that are really just regular everyday people doing GIS analysis in their free time. So Chris, how about you? What does GIS mean to you?
Oh, well, my love of maps is what really brought me to GIS and geography in school. I started out in emergency management and fell into GIS and geography, which became my passion. As I've gone through my career and through school, watching people's eyes light up and gain an understanding of their spatial relationship in their data is really fantastic. When I guess while I was in school, some epidemiologists came and talked to us. I mean, this is years and years ago, and they were just fascinated how they could compare their data that they have to space and visualize that. So the kind of cliched term there of a picture's worth 1,000 words. I mean, maps and being able to visualize your data, your spatial and non-spatial data tied together on a map. Who knows how many words that's worth? It's worth more words than I think anybody can express. So, the applications for real estate, schools, commercial, medical, beyond government are just really endless. And when a Zillow or some other real estate application comes out, now you can see not only what the houses are worth, maybe, but what's for sale, and then dig even further into what it looks like on the ground and what it looks like in the house. And that's all GIS, and that's all the power that it provides, and the additional
Chris,
look that you can see. Yeah.
I'm trying not to interrupt you, but I wanted to say, one of the really cool things that you just brought up with the real estate stuff is that you can see what the school district is like and identify like who's in the government there. All of those things can be tied to a single point on the plan. I love it. I love the whole idea of like layering data upon data.
For sure. And then beyond that is, the remote sensing and spatial analysis on shapes, and there's a really cool exploration that you can do if you want to go around the coastline of northeastern Russia. There's some secret sub bases that aren't so secret now because of the imagery that we now have access to, and there's just so many cool things that you can see, and that we can never see before, and having that understanding, being able to see that relationship is just, it's powerful. It's exciting.
All right.
What about you, Will?
Is it my turn?
Yep. I think it's your turn now, Will.
Great. Yeah. So my love with geography and GIS really started when I was 8 years old. My dad worked for the Forest Service, so we moved every 5 to 10 years, and we moved from Virginia to Oregon. I remember sitting in the passenger seat looking at the map, and my dad would ask me, we were in I think we're in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and he kind of taught me the little red numbers. These were old AAA maps. Little red numbers between the cities represented the amount of miles between those cities. And so you'd say, okay, how far are we to Columbus, Ohio? And I would do the math, like, oh, we're 56 miles away. And I got super excited about that. And just, I kind of fell, I remember memorizing my state capitals in second grade. So yeah, that's kind of where it all started. But when I was in college, I was trying to find a job that would be not only something that I love, but something that would be useful and I'd actually have career opportunities in. And GIS was an easy choice for me because of that. It was, at the time, it was kind of a growing industry where there were lots of new positions opening up across different types of companies, specifically within the federal government, doing GIS. And what's interesting is, for a time there, I kind of felt like that was going away, that GIS experts weren't as needed because so many technology companies were out there solving the problems of GIS. But I'm finding that it's becoming increasingly important in today's world. If for those of you who have seen that movie about, it was that dramatization of the history of McDonald's called The Founder. And there was a point there where Ray Kroc was working with his accountant or whatever. And he's like, hey, we need to get out of the business of fast food and into the business of real estate. Right. And that kind of became their business. And what I'm envisioning what happened there is that GIS has over time become increasingly important there because they're looking at okay, where are we going to open our next restaurant? And they have analytics behind that, and they're looking at existing assets and deciding, what can we sell off versus what can we build new. So many large corporations today have that today, and they have to because everyone else is doing it, and that's how they compete. But it's not just the private sector; it's also the public sector too. We see this increasingly in the EAM space, where public entities are discovering the need to really understand where all of their assets are. It's not enough to just know that, oh yeah, I have 200 fire hydrants in this subdivision. They need to know where each one specifically is and all of the characteristics of those assets, in order to make sure that they're properly maintained, that they know how much value they are and how they're depreciating in value over time, and when it makes sense to replace them versus repair them. So as companies and entities and organizations embrace GIS, it really opens the doors for increased process efficiencies and increased cost savings if done correctly. And really, as I see it, that's really the main point we want to make today, is that by embracing GIS, you open up a whole new world of opportunities within your organization to do a better job, to save money, to make everyone happy. So that's what GIS means to me.
Hey, Will,
Thanks,
did
Will.
you have triptychs? Did you have triptychs? The maps that you flipped over on the spiral bound maps?
Oh no, we didn't. I can't remember what brand we had. I remember we had a Rand McNally
Nice.
nationwide flip book, but yeah, that was pretty sweet. I actually still have that, but it's all worn out and pages are missing now.
Awesome. All right. So today we're really going to just focus on the benefits of integrating your maintenance data with your GIS, and then also just kind of some back-end discussion over best practices for setting up your schemas for your feature sets. So as we get started, I'm going to turn it over to Will, bring us into our conversation about integrating maintenance, and then we'll move on from there.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Marion. Can you go? Yeah, let's go to the slide. So one of the huge benefits of integrating maintenance with GIS is this idea of having open data. And when we talk about open data, it's really all about, and really it's open, we're talking about open GIS data here. It's all about points on your map. And that could be point lines, polygons, whatever. But it's all about where your stuff is, the stuff that you manage, the stuff that you own, the stuff that are available to your citizens or customers. Things like parks, trash routes, catch basins. As you collect that data, it becomes increasingly important for that data to become accessible by your customers, by your citizens. And so as a result, like when we talk about transparency specifically, it's not necessarily about opening up the floodgates of all the data that you have, because a lot of that data is not going to be useful. But planning the structure and the schema of your data to make it something that you can turn into something that's useful to your customers, build maps for them, let them see where things are. And it's not just, it's not just about the assets, it's also about the work that you're doing. And we'll talk about that a little bit later when we get to maintenance planning. But when you think of the work that you're doing, it really allows you to not only show what assets are being maintained, where you're spending your money, but also gives your citizens a view into like, hey, here are the areas that we're focusing on right now, and here's when we're going to be able to fix the issues of the issues and problems of tomorrow. This goes a long way towards communicating what's effectively your backlog to your customers. As they better understand the challenges that you face internally, they'll be hopefully, and this isn't universally true because some people are just unreasonable, but hopefully that will mean that your citizens will be much more forgiving in terms of like, hey, maybe they didn't fix that pothole in front of your house, but they just installed a new park or a new water feature or something like that. So next we'll talk about integrations a little bit. So I have a background with APIs and integration enablement. And this is one of the things that I really loved about GIS, or really love about GIS, is it really all comes down to integrations. And it's not, when we talk about integrations, we're usually talking about specifically the AssetWorks to GIS integration, where we're pulling in assets and asset attributes, and we're also pushing data back into your GIS as maintenance occurs within the system. But it's more than that. Really, when you think about integrations, this could be any other system pushing data back into your GIS. When you or your employees or your compatriots are editing data that relates back to GIS in some way or relates back to assets in some way, it doesn't make sense for you to have to update it twice, right? So if you're working in a say a CCTV system and you're updating fields about pipes that are underground, if you're updating them in the CCTV system for use in maintenance planning, it makes sense for you to update those attributes in GIS. It's funny how often we see customers try to do this manually, and we get it. Like integrations can be expensive, but if you do them right and you plan ahead, they provide a wealth of opportunity for cost savings and reduced time entry or data entry, time to do data entry. So. Next, we have analytics. So the obvious choice, the obvious thing here to do is by integrating your GIS with AssetWorks EAM, you're very quickly able to identify what are the high maintenance areas. So as you plan your maintenance, you'll be able to see those maintenance activities as points on your map. But beyond that, you'll also be able to compare the preventive maintenance that you're doing with the reactive maintenance that you're doing. So this will allow you to see like, oh, it'll allow you to identify some trends where like, hey, maybe these older neighborhoods that are in our jurisdiction or these older assets that we have to maintain inherently cost more, right? Or maybe it's a different trend. Maybe it's, this piece of equipment, even though it's newer than this other one, we're having to maintain it a lot. Maybe this brand or this model year is problematic, right? Maybe we need to replace this one. It helps you enable those decisions that you need to make and do it with data to back it up. So also location history, this kind of has 2 points. So when you think of location history, this is often just about what are the activities that are going on in a specific location or against a specific asset. That's kind of the obvious answer. But another piece here is as you plan out your GIS schema, your GIS strategy, it becomes increasingly important to identify situations where a given asset may not exist in a specific location forever. So a great example of this is with trees. So oftentimes I run into a lot of customers that will track the trees just as points on the map. But what inevitably happens is, if that tree dies or gets hit by a car or is struck by lightning or something like that, and it needs to be replaced, what happens is, they're starting that asset over again. So they have to create a new asset and put it in that exact same place. Now, if you're anticipating that happening, now trees are just one example of where that happens, where it's like the asset itself is less of the asset. It's not the tree in this case. It's actually the place where the planting location, right? That's the place in the map. And then assets will come and go as time goes on. Another example of that might be something like a fire hydrant. Like they very rarely get replaced, but they do occasionally get replaced, whether if they're hit by a car or they rust through, or they get to a point where they're beyond repair. So when that happens, it can be a challenge to, delete that asset or retire that asset and remove it from its location, or delete its XY point, and then bring a new one back in its exact location. Now, that strategy doesn't have to be used across the board, but it's just one example of a GIS strategy that you can use that will save you time later on. So it's just, I'm not here to advise each of you on the best ways to do this. It's just one consideration to make. But these are those GIS strategies that you have to consider when tracking location history. Does it make sense to track location history, or does it make sense to just have static assets and static locations? Maintenance planning is the next one. So with maintenance planning, when you think of maintenance planning, at least in my experience, a lot of organizations that I've worked with, they think of maintenance planning in terms of, say, subdivisions or zones within a city. So they're going to say, okay, we're going to flush all the hydrants in this subdivision today. And they'll just drive down the streets and then go do it. Now, for something like hydrants, that's probably a pretty safe bet. You don't necessarily need to know exactly where every hydrant is. But if you do know where exactly every hydrant is, you can plan your maintenance much better, because when you know where a hydrant is, you can look at what valves are nearby, what catch basins are nearby, what other underground features, whether they be pipes or valves or inlets or whatever, are there that we might be able to maintain here along with this. Hydrants probably isn't the best example here, because that's kind of a specialized maintenance activity to a certain degree. But understanding the location of your maintenance plans is incredibly important when dealing with underground assets. For example, if you have a problem with a water main that's going to require a replacement or some kind of repair, you're probably going to have to dig up a road. If you're planning on repaving that road, it makes sense for you to do that maintenance underground first, so you don't pave the road and then have to dig it up almost immediately. So this is where GIS comes into play. Not only does it allow you to visualize where the maintenance needs to occur, but allows you to show different disparate assets together in the same location. And really, that maintenance planning and asset location visualization kind of bleed into each other, because when we think of asset location visualization, a lot of people think like, oh, if I can see the asset, I know where it is. The reality is there's so many other assets to consider and so many other things that may need to be maintained that are either underground or maybe covered by mud or dirt or leaves at certain times of the year. So, and then finally with the condition analysis, when we talk about going visual, it's all about visualizing the condition or the current state of those assets. So when you're able to visualize where the problem areas in your jurisdiction are, it becomes a lot easier to plan that maintenance. So, I mean, that's pretty much all what I wanted to talk about with this slide. But what it all comes down to is that a lot of times when organizations think about performing their maintenance, whether it be preventive or reactive, they're so laser focused on the asset that they forget about the asset's location. And that plays such a huge role in how you plan that maintenance and the order in which you do things. And that's why GIS is so powerful in helping facilitate the planning of that maintenance.
Well, I think what you're bringing up is super great. When we talk about condition analysis, this is kind of one of the things that I've always thought was one of the best things that GIS can do, is it can really identify for you in a visual way where your problem areas are. And then when you go in to do more analysis in those areas, you can really identify, I mean, is it the material that is creating the problem? Is it the weather? Is it the drainage is bad? What is the reason that we're having all of these issues in this particular area with these particular assets? And that allows organizations to identify, maybe we need to replace all of this, and then we need a capital project, and now we need to get approvals and we need to plan for that. And How is that going to disrupt the community? Like all of those things really depend upon GIS to allow us to make those decisions with all of the data that we need. And without that maintenance information in your GIS, it would be very difficult to just look at a spreadsheet and figure that out.
One thing I'll say about condition analysis and going visual, kind of another facet of that too, would be there's not a whole lot of standards for condition ratings and condition analysis in the world right now. Sure, there's some for CCTV and manholes and whatnot, but not a ton on a lot of other areas of asset management. And so another way to look at going visual with condition analysis is when your folks are out in the field, they are the experts. The field workers are the experts for the most part on their assets. They know what they're supposed to look like. They know what they look like new. They know what they look like when they fail, and they know what they look like in between. So giving the field worker an opportunity to use a visual method, looking at and comparing to maybe a picture to determine a condition rating allows them to be able to communicate back up to someone in management who's maybe never even seen a pump in a pump house in water production. But they will know that this item is in trouble, it needs some help, or this item is in good shape. So that's one of the things to consider when looking at collecting data for condition analysis. And then once you have that condition rating on an individual asset, then you can zoom out and start looking at all the aspects of when and where and why to replace. So it's kind of a neat part too.
Absolutely. And that kind of brings into what I want to get into in the next section, which is how do we make GIS user-friendly to our users, right? To our technicians that are out in the field, entering in this data so that we can have an update and accurate GIS inventory of all of our features, that we have everything that we need to do this analysis accurately and to the best. Like kind of walking through how do we set these things up so that our users really understand what information you're trying to capture. You know, I've seen probably, I don't know, 45 different organizations GIS data, and it's all different. And Chris and I were talking a little bit yesterday about the local government I guess schema that has been put out, and it's just a suggestion. I don't using anything that has been put out that is normalizing data structure in GIS at this point. And so as we're collecting all of this data, we want people to be putting the right data into the right fields so that we can get all of this analysis and information out of our asset data. So I kind of have some screenshots in here that I'm just going to have up on the screen while we're talking about this. But we really want to identify, you know, I'm going to go to the next one. So being able to look into GIS, click on one of the assets that you have in there, and actually understand what the fields mean, right? I've been seen these different databases, and some of them have absolutely no information in their GIS. It's all linked to tables, and the point in itself is the only thing that GIS is carrying specifically, right? Those databases that there are 110 attributes on each feature within their feature classes, and 90% of them are blank. And then you have other ones where they have 110 and all of them are filled in and they're all important to the processes that that organization has. So as we are looking at GIS, we're trying to figure out what schema we want to use. I find that there are certain aspects to information that the end user has to have to be able to recognize that, yes, this is the asset that I am currently looking at, and two, this is the information that I need to fill in. So there are a ton of present that information to your end users. You have collector with asset works. You can do it through work orders. There are a ton of different ways. It depends on really your maintenance software or your mobile software that you have your technicians using. But what the field name means, the likelihood that you're going to get data that is valid is probably low. The other thing that I've found, use choice lists as a way to narrow the amount of bad data you could get into a field. That's usually the best way to go. Sometimes you can't because it's like readings for pressure or some other free form that has to be put in. But if you can, that's usually the best way to go. Chris, what have you seen?
Yeah, those domains and subtype codes have definitely saved a lot of headaches. I have seen GISs where it's open and everybody can enter their data the way that they see fit. And so you have pipes that are one IN, one INCH, one inch with a quote mark, or just one, or maybe they even spelled out 1 inch. And so utilizing those subtype codes to narrow it down so they can only put in the pre-approved, pre-designed data is definitely that's going to be a best practice for sure. Yeah, just in the olden days of GIS, the GIS data was so extremely valuable monetarily because you had one shot to collect data, because you probably were paying a consultant to go out and collect that data. You were probably not going to have $100,000 worth of data collection equipment, plus you weren't going to have the staffing. The GIS departments were very small years and years ago. They're still small today, but you'd have 1 or 2 people, maybe you'd get an intern, and for them to go out and have the time to be able to physically collect those assets was very, very difficult, very expensive. And so everybody had their data, and they protect everybody in the GIS department, GIS managers, GIS administrators, and techs. They protected their data, and they didn't let anybody touch it. Well, that was fine, except that as time goes by, very quickly your data ages out, and if it's not being updated, and if your users don't have access to help you update it from the field, your data gets old and rotten, and it doesn't do anything for you anymore. So now with all the tools that we have with Collector and a bunch of others that Marion suggested there, we have the ability to empower our users to collect spatially correct data and correctly attributed data. Again, those subtype codes are a great way to keep things in line, but also the being able to collect spatial data with devices, your iPhone or your Android device. You might get, I don't know, 10 meter accuracy. So wherever they took the point, it's probably within 10 meters. But there's some very low cost and efficient add-ons, Bluetooth, and that will attach to your device and attach to Collector or another collection method. And you can now get, sub-meter or meter accuracy and not have to spend that $100,000 for or $20,000 for a GeoXD8 or whatever they were. You can buy a less expensive, accurate GPS unit that anybody could use. You just turn it on and it works. Because that's the other part too, is the complexity of collecting the data in the field. That used to be a major hindrance, and now it's not. It's available for users. So.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the access to applications or technology that allows the collection of data to become so much easier and more cost effective is a huge benefit as community as a whole, I would think. You know, as we get into kind of a little bit more about what we discussed here, you know, I think the big one that I saw in here is the peers. You know, I think as we become a more communicative community, right? And I know probably everybody on this call today goes to the Esri conference every year, and everybody mingles and has conversations around how other people are doing things to try and figure out if they can change their processes to make better. I think that's one of the most important pieces, is to really try and come as a peer group to a consensus on what is really working for us, what doesn't work for us, and how can we help other communities to learn from our mistakes or learn from our successes. Because
Yes.
you know, as you know, bad data in, then you get bad data out, right? So
Something I've
did you
seen,
want to talk
Marion,
about-
yeah, something I've seen that's been very effective, and if your region has this, it's fantastic. If it doesn't, you might consider putting something together because they're very successful, and that is regional user groups. I live in Utah, and in the Salt Lake region, up until COVID, we had a quarterly meeting. Every quarter, everybody got together and we presented what we were doing with GIS. We usually had a GIS related company that would sponsor lunch maybe, and they would get to do a short presentation, you know, do their pitch. But the most important thing was the users get to share what they were working on at that moment. And some places do it annually, some places do it biannual and quarterly. I don't know too many places that have endeavored to go monthly, but you know, in our small community here, we average 100 people that show up to this every single quarter. And then we have counties outside of Salt Lake County, the North and the South counties, Davis County and Utah County, and they also have quarterly meetings. Not Davis County, but definitely Utah County, because I used to attend that one. And that is a much smaller community down there, and they still had 20 to 30 people every single quarter that showed up for, you know, a 2 to 3 hour meeting. And in that, you get to know the other people in your community. You also get the opportunity to hear about some innovations. Maybe you get to hear about a problem that someone else is having that you're also having, because, you know, issues in GIS, issues in utilities, issues in local government, a lot of times are regional. They are, you know, what I'm dealing with today, my neighbor city or my neighbor utility is also dealing with the same problem. So rather than having everybody invent an issue, a way to handle those problems on their own, why not coordinate? And so, you know, the peer sharing is extremely powerful. It's definitely something that Esri has pushed throughout time. They are more than willing to participate in regional groups and state groups and whatever. But another point, I'll jump just a little bit on the peers as well for data storage. Classically in the past, if I had an asset type, so I had hydrants, and my neighbor city or somebody else in my community was looking at creating an asset layer of hydrants, they would very frequently go to them and say, "Hey, what are you doing? Can I borrow your structure?" And they would put their structure in. And so that was a really fast and effective way to get data schemas put together. The detractor from that situation was that there started to be a lot of junk because one organization had some very specific asset attribute and the other did not necessarily need that or didn't want it or didn't even know what it meant. And so they just kind of left it in their schema. And so those got passed around. And so there is that situation where you have a schema for an asset that is old and it doesn't have, it's got a bunch of stuff in there. And it's still very much encouraged rather than, again, reinventing the wheel, particularly with these schemas, because it can be very daunting, a very daunting task. Like, what do we want? To borrow that from someone else. But make sure that when you do that, you only keep the data that you only keep the attributes and the data fields that you actually want and need. Don't keep stuff too many for the future. We might one day attributes. Keep those on a list somewhere else and keep them out of your data. That way, it's much easier for your users to consume that data, and you're not dealing with a whole bunch of blank fields like Marion was mentioning at the beginning of this conversation. Blank fields, old dead data fields, fields that are no longer being used, and so on. So that's what I threw that junk out on there. So don't keep a whole bunch of junk in your GIS. There's no need for that anymore. It's a lot easier to manage your data anymore than it used to was. So, and I'll just throw one more out there on the LGIM. If you're not familiar with LGIM, you can certainly go look that up. It's an Esri offering, and they did exactly what I just described, which was they went out and talked to all the peers, all their customers, and found out what people were doing with specific assets and conglomerated them all from hundreds and hundreds of agencies and try to put together a best practice. Well, again, there's a whole bunch of stuff in there that no one's ever going to use except for someone very specific as far as the attributes go. But if you have nothing and you have no peers, it's a really great place to start if you're starting with a new asset, because they have a ton of background information on those as well. They've completely filled out the metadata, which I won't get into metadata, but anyways, so.
Yeah. So I think that's a really great point. Having the conversation of what is needed versus what could possibly be needed in the future is definitely, you should start at what is needed. You can always add more later. One of the things that I always say when I'm having conversations such as this is like, what is it that you're trying to get out of it? Like, what problem are you trying to solve with your data? And that will probably allow you to make more clear-cut decisions on what data is needed to be collected so that you can then report on that data. Each organization, each city, each county has different requirements as far as what they need to report on, what matters to them, their constituents. All of those things need to be taken into account when we're setting up our schemas, because it's very important to know what data has to be collected so that we can provide the data out to those that need to use it. I think, as we are getting to the end of this hour, I can't believe it's been that fast, but I think that it's more of a conversation around your practices and your community, and then an understanding how are my end users going to use this information. That always seems to be a great place to start when having discussions about how do I set up my schema for my feature classes and my tables. Chris, Will, was there anything else you wanted to share as we moved through the presentation?
Nope, let's move on.
Okay, just a quick screen. I wanted to kind of go through this a little bit. So the picture that we were seeing earlier is my ArcGIS online account. Same, I don't think it's the same sign, the same information that I'm showing in this screenshot. So depending on what maintenance software that you have or how you're actually inputting this data, whether you're using Collector or not, I don't want to focus on AssetWorks for this. I just wanted to show you the option. You know, whatever your naming convention for those fields in GIS, they can be changed to be more readable by the end user, depending on the application you're using to collect that information. Got it fully listed out, you know, milepost, orientation, those types of things. Whereas, oops, you know, the road with no spaces, orientation can be completely filled out. Just showing that there are options as far as your collection decisions, like how that information is going to be collected, to make that information a lot more readable to your end users. I, of course, am using AssetWorks because it's really the only one I have access to. So as we're walking through all of these processes and really talking, as can impact your constituents, your community, your organization's ability to make decisions, long-term decisions for maintenance processes, you know, making sure that that collection process for your technicians in the field or your GIS technicians that are going out and doing that information or information collection, know what information that needs to be gathered is super important. That is the end of the presentation. So I didn't know, Will, did you have any last thoughts before we open it up to questions?
No, I'm excited to hear the questions, if any.
Me too, yeah. Chris,
All
did
right,
you
perfect.
No, I think we've covered it for now. You know, we could go on for hours, I'm sure, but we'll leave it at that, right?
All right, well, perfect. I can help with the questions for sure. But before we jump into the Q&A session, I just want to remind everyone that if you have any questions at this time, please send them to host using the Webex chat tool on your screen. Provided that we have enough time, I'll pass your question to our presenters and they will be happy to give you an answer. So guys, we did have a few questions come through, so I'm not sure which one of you will jump on it first, but I'll just state our first question. When collecting data, what do you think are the right ways to gather important attributes?
So I guess I'll jump on that one. So for me, it really depends on what tools you have available. If you have a maintenance application where your subject matter experts, which are those technicians out in the field, have the ability to collect that information while they're out there, I would say that is probably your number one way of gathering that data. And that's because, just as Chris mentioned earlier, you know, they know what they're looking for, they know what looks right, and they know what looks wrong. And they also can probably more quickly than a GIS analyst who doesn't really know anything about a pump answer those questions and move on with what they're doing for the day. If using Collector, that is an immediate, you know, entry into your GIS. If you're using a software such as AssetWorks, you know, you have the GIS integration. It'll also speak to GIS. It's very, it's on a timer, so it can be every second. So you can have that information as quickly as you need it. So I would, that would be my recommendation.
Yeah,
Right,
I think.
thanks, Mary.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Will.
No, I was gonna echo what Marion said, that like when you're defining these effectively what become these schemas, it's all about the people that are the boots on the ground that are actually doing the maintenance. They're going to know those assets inside and out and know exactly what attributes there are. or need to be tracked. And the other thing to consider is that when you think of two different assets that are of the same class or the same type, what are the differentiators from them? You know, in every asset type is going to be a little bit different, but it comes down to things like size and associated parts and obviously location and things like that. But every asset will be a little bit different. So I think the LGIM is a great way to start, but ultimately it just comes down to the nature of the assets themselves and who's maintaining them and what information is required.
And I'll pop into, if you are lucky enough to have a budget to hire out data collection, there's so many options right now. They have data collection where they can drive down the street, collect all the data, and then you own the video or you own the pictures, and you can always go back and through that video and obtain additional attributes. But if you have that opportunity, make sure you look at all your options, you know, because it's expensive. And so maybe stop by the Esri conference and see what options are there for data collection. The old way of sending a whole bunch of people out with GPS devices, it works, it's great, but it's expensive, it's time consuming. And, you know, again, if you're paying for it, if your people are doing it, then that's really the only way to go about it. But they're going to be doing that during their normal course of work. So it doesn't really add a whole lot of additional overhead onto the cost of collecting data. But if you are paying for it, make sure you vet the company that you're using for your data collection. Make sure they're using the best, most modern technology, and hopefully something that is revisitable. I'll make up a word there, so that you can review it again in the future. So I'll just throw that out there. Thanks.
All right, awesome. Thanks, guys. So moving on to the next question that we got. So what is your opinion on whether we should or shouldn't version?
Always version.
Always version. So super quick.
Yeah.
So I'll just kind of throw something out here. You know, versioning is very important to your processes. When you have so many people editing data, when you have so many different integrations in a lot of cases, bringing data into your GIS, versioning I cannot overstate how important that is. You want to make sure that you have your temporal data too, and that you're looking at stuff over time. I mean, I can't overstate how important versioning is.
There are situations where you may have a certain asset type, a brand new asset type that you may not version. But as soon as you get to a point of this is now my data is starting to be filled out, then it immediately goes into versioning so that you can protect that bulk of data that you've collected. But otherwise, why wouldn't you version? It's just so easy.
Yeah.
I think it can be tempting to not version just because of the amount of work that you have to go through in order to maintain those versions. But the reality is you have that effort will be done somewhere. If you're versioning, it is the easy choice, because even though it seems hard at times, if you don't version, you're going to create larger problems down the road, or you're just going to have bad data. So
yeah, bad data is worse than no data.
Exactly.
And I think the modern tools for versioning, I mean, it used to be like over the weekend kind of process. Now it's more of an end of the day kind of process, maybe once a week kind of process that you can rectify your versions and post everything that needs to be done and identify any issues. So it's a lot easier now than it was, but yeah, it definitely, there is some overhead there. But take a training class, learn how to do it right, and learn how to be efficient.
All right, thank you, guys.
Just all classes that are available on how to do certain things in GIS. I mean, I think it's amazing, just the amount of data that you can learn and get to on the interwebs, if you will.
And a lot of it's free. Esri offers a lot of free cloud coursework. Their paid courses are very meaty. So if you go to a paid course, make sure you've eaten your Wheaties in the morning, because you'll be learning a lot. But a lot of free coursework, a lot of offline video coursework from them and other sources too. There's plenty of stuff on YouTube.
Great, thank you guys. So 2 more questions. Reminder to everyone, if you have any more questions, then chat them in on the Webex chat tool. But the next question we got was, in your opinion, what are the most important fields that any feature should have in GIS for the end user?
The unique identifier. It's not global ID.
I'm going to kind of take this one. I'll let you guys talk about the unique identifier piece, but I think it's kind of really important, and I see it probably half of the time that I see it organizations' databases, but a valid description of the asset. I can't explain enough how if every description in your GIS is catch basin, that is not going to be very helpful to the end user. So what I like to say is that you probably have a few fields in your GIS that can give the end user an understanding of where it is, what it is, and what should I bring with me to my work. So for instance, if you have a pipe and it's 4-inch galvanized on marker 12.2, that's much more effective from a field information standpoint than one word explanation of what it is. Chris, do you want to talk about the unique identifier?
Yeah, just there was a push, I think, more recently in the Esri world to look at using global ID as a unique identifier. That it's kind of a hard number to use. It's 36 characters long. It doesn't mean anything. Yes, it's unique throughout the system, but it's just really has very little value other than being unique. So creating a unique identifier for each of your assets, maybe something that even has some logic in it. So not only do I know this is a hydrant, but I know which quadrant or which tile within the city that it's in, or maybe which road it's on, and then some sort of unique identifier on top of that. Or in a building, you might be able to build even more logic into a unique identifier, so that it means a little bit more than just being straight unique. Object ID is no longer unique or static, and global ID, again, it's kind of gross. So unique identifier is really important in my opinion, especially if you're going to go into some sort of asset management. So
yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I mean, as I'm going through, I always what if wouldn't it be easier if it was a hydrant on Main Street and it's the third one from the east or something like that? Like that would at least, just looking at it, I would be like, oh, okay, gotcha, I'm away. 3B, 7, 12, F, keep going for 20 more, just gives me no data, no information at all. From a user standpoint, obviously.
Yeah, I think one quick point I'll make there about the global ID. When systems are talking to systems, a lot of times that unique identifier, the global ID, can be really handy because they are unique across all the different feature classes and asset types. But yeah, for when you're integrating with something like AssetWorks EAM, having a unique identifier that means something. And I really like to see customers use the prefixes for their different feature classes, like STRM for storm and WWTD for wastewater treatment. Things like that really, they give the asset ID a lot more meaning to the people who are interacting with it. And that asset ID will be the first thing that they want to use in order to find the asset when they're typing something in. So yeah, using something like that makes a lot more sense. It can be a little bit more difficult to maintain, but man, that global ID is that it's basically just a GUID, right? System generated. It doesn't mean anything. It's crazy long. But when when an integration is managing that and it's using it as like a foreign key, it can be really handy. But yeah, users should never have to. People should never have to interact with that number.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. So this is our final question. If anyone else chats in any questions, and we'll make sure to get them to the presenters and they can address them via email. But for today's last question, is there an application feature that identifies where I am so that I can navigate the GIS to review other assets at the same location?
So it all depends on whether you're talking about AssetWorks EAM. If you're talking about AssetWorks EAM, then yeah, we have a mobile application that allows you to kind of say, hey, where am I and what assets are closest to me? We also have the ability to do that in our web application. As I think you can do it in Collector. I mean, I don't.
Yeah, Collector allows you to do it. I think Survey 123 allows you to do it as well. And really, most mobile applications will connect to your phone's or tablet's GPS, or even your computer's GPS in certain cases, to tell you exactly where you're at. AssetWorks EAM will do that on Windows if you use the AssetWorks EAM application on your laptop. So yeah, so it's definitely possible. It does take a little bit of forethought if you're going to be offline, because you have to choose which, in AssetWorks EAM specifically, if you're going to be offline, you have to choose which feature classes or types of assets you want to download. So that'd be something to consider, is if you're planning on going out to a remote location where you won't have Wi-Fi or 4G connection, then you'll want to consider what are all the different asset types you may want to maintain once you're out there.
All right, awesome. Thank you, guys. So it looks like that's all the time we have for today. At this time, I'd like to thank all of you for taking the time to attend today's presentation. I hope that you've secured some valuable takeaways to keep in mind moving forward. Marion, Will, and Chris, I'd also like to thank you on behalf of AssetWorks once again for sharing your expertise with everyone today. As you all can see, their contact information is available here if you have any follow-up questions or concerns. But with that being said, thanks again for everyone attending. We hope to see you at our future webinar presentations, and happy GIS Day again from everyone at AssetWorks.
Yes.
Thanks, everyone.